Over the last few weeks, since I got back from Dragon Con, I've been trying to process everything that happened. It was an absolute whirlwind. But as I've been thinking about all of the different things I learned and the people I met, it brought to mind something that doesn't get talked about in the author community. And that is the power and importance of networking. So I want to share my understanding of networking and talk to you a little bit about how important it has been for my career. For anybody who's new to this channel, my name is Seth. I'm a full-time fantasy author. I've written 25 books, and I make these videos because there are a lot of bad books out there, and I don't want yours to be one of them. But today we're not going to talk specifically about books, though networking can apply to improving your books as well. A lot of the things that I'm going to talk about in this video actually apply to more than just your author career. They also apply to how you get better at the craft of writing. But because we were just at Dragon Con and most of my conversations were business related, I'm going to talk through sort of basics of networking. And if you're a new author, how do you engage with the author community? Like I said, I just got back from Dragon Con and it was wild. I didn't really understand what it was going to be like before I went. This was my first year, and so I went in trying to have an open mind, trying to sort of stay flexible and just accept whatever came. And what came was nonstop action from 8 in the morning when I got up for breakfast to 2 the following morning when I finally tumbled back into bed. And it was day after day after day of exactly that same thing. But what I realized really quickly is that all of the best conversations happened in sort of spontaneous moments as authors would gather together and just start chatting. People were incredibly friendly. They were willing to share their tips and their tricks, their hard-won experience, and the things that they had learned throughout their own author careers. And we all benefited from it. It was fantastic. And I'm definitely looking forward to going next year. Additionally, the Athon booth was an absolute blast. And if you're going next year, definitely stop by because we're coming back. So let's talk a little bit about networking, though. Networking is this kind of scary word because even those of us who have been in industries where networking was really important, like I was in sales for a number of years, and networking in sales is just hugely important. And so it's one of the first things you learn how to do. Even if you're in an industry like that, it can be really intimidating to step out and meet new people and forge new connections. Because the reality is that networking requires us to step outside of our comfort zone and meet new people. And if you're anything like me, that can be pretty nerve-wracking. Now, I'm extroverted and I'm highly social and I really like people, and it's still nerve-wracking. So I can imagine that if that's not your natural bent, if you are instead introverted or you're not as comfortable around people, it can be even worse. So I want to talk about a few little hacks that I have used over the years to get better at this whole networking thing. Before I talk about those hacks, however, I think it's important to understand why we even need to network in the first place. This is the truth, as succinctly as I can sum it up. Opportunities come through people we know 90% of the time. If you want to give yourself an advantage in anything, get to know people, because people are the ones who open the doors for us when we can't open them ourselves. So a great example of this. If you send a manuscript to an agent, they're going to read it, no idea who you are. They're just going to read through it, and if it has the things they like, they'll say sure, and they'll add it to their pile of considerations for taking you on as a client. But they read it with a very critical eye. Now, if you've met the agent, they know who you are, they've enjoyed talking to you, then as soon as they start reading, they're going to associate what they're reading with the feelings they have for you. And if those feelings are positive, they're going to look at whatever they're reading with a positive spin. This is human nature. And it's not that we get to know people or that we network in order to take advantage of them, but instead with the understanding that when someone likes you, all of the rules change. So it would be silly of us not to recognize that fact and leverage it for our own careers. The same is true the opposite way. If you have a positive experience with an agent, when you talk to another writer, you're going to say, man, this agent is just fantastic. I've loved working with them. You should really submit too. It's a two-way street. What does this have to do with being an indie author? Because we don't have agents. Well, when you know other authors, they're willing to share what has worked for them with you. They're willing to make introductions for you, helping you meet the people who are going to be able to further your career. And when your book pops up on their social feed, they're much more likely to leave a positive comment or share it with their own followers because they like you. And that actually leads us to the first rule of networking. You meet people through people. What does that mean? It means that if you just randomly walk into a room and you don't know anybody in that room, it's going to be hard for you to get to know everyone because you're going to have to spend all of your effort and all of your energy with the first few introductions. But networking is like a web. And as soon as you meet one person, they can help you shortcut the process to making 2 or 3 other connections. The amazing thing about DragonCon wasn't that I was meeting individuals. It was that I was meeting whole groups. Because what would happen is, as I was talking to somebody, they would say, oh, I see so-and-so over there. Let me introduce you to them. Invariably, the person they're introducing me to is already talking to other people that they know. And all of a sudden, I'm being introduced not just to one person, but a whole group of new people. And then as I connect with each of them, and as we stand there or sit there and talk, we start establishing connections. And somebody says, oh, I'd really love to meet so-and-so. And one of the members in the group says, oh, I have a connection with them. Let me introduce you to them as well. And this web continues to grow and expand. And likewise, I can do the same. I can say, hey, I know an author that you'd really love to meet. Let me make the introduction for you, thereby expanding your network as well. And so there's this reciprocal thing happening. But instead of me having to chase down and cold introduce myself to everyone, it's happening with a warm introduction. If I found your address, knocked on your door, you opened up the door, and I said, hi, my name is Seth, I'm an author, I'd really love to meet you because of these reasons. That's a cold introduction. You have no idea who I am. You're likely to look at me and be like, why are you wasting my time? This is going to take a lot of effort, and so I'm just not really interested in getting to know you. Now, if one of your best friends, or let's say a family member, brought me over and said, hey, this is Seth, I really think that you two would connect well, you're going to give me the time of day. You're going to say, oh, yeah, maybe it's worth the effort to interact with this person. And so that warm introduction is just incredibly helpful in making those social connections. Now, some of you are watching this thinking to yourself, but Seth, I don't know anybody. I can't make any connections because if I were to show up at DragonCon and I were to walk down into the author hangout area, I just wouldn't know anybody. That's okay. And it leads us to sort of the second rule of networking. The first one is that people introduce you to people. The second one is that you should go with a community already. Now, you don't need to have fast friends attending the con. You don't even need to know people in the actual sense of the word. Instead, all you need to have done is had enough touch points with them that they will recognize who you are. Now, I don't mean that they'll recognize your face, but that you can remind them of when you have interacted. Let me give you a great example. There were a number of book reviewers that I was interested in interacting with when I got to DragonCon, and I saw that they were going to be there. So I just reached out on Twitter, and I started a conversation with them. I started through sort of the least intrusive method possible, which is that I followed them on Twitter, and I replied to a number of their tweets, just interacting on whatever it was they were talking about. I waited a little while, and then I sent them some direct messages saying, hey, I saw you're going to be at DragonCon. That's really cool. I'd love to interact with you there. Now, I also sweetened the deal by sending them something. And you don't always have to do this, but I sent them a copy of a book that was coming out, and I said, even if you're not going to review it, that's okay. I just wanted to send this to you. And the reason is because I want to be able, when I get to DragonCon, I wanted to be able to go over and introduce myself, saying, hey, I'm Seth. We interacted on Twitter. I sent you that book. I hope it came okay. Now let's talk. And because I already have those points of contact, they are much more likely to say, oh, Seth, it's really cool to meet you in person. Let's talk. And they're much more likely to include me in their conversations and bring me into whatever community they have as well. Can you see how that is so much more effective than just waiting in anticipation to see them at DragonCon, walking up to them directly and saying, hey, I'm Seth and I want to have a relationship with you? Like, that's awkward. No matter how you slice it, that's awkward. So instead of that, if we can cultivate the warm lead, to use sales terminology, by interacting with them beforehand, it gives us an automatic in to step into the community, introduce ourselves, and start engaging in our networking. And over time, as you do this more and more, you're just going to start forming networks of your own. And that's where this thing really takes off. Now, the third rule for networking is to approach as a fan. Because if you follow the first two rules, you can sometimes find yourself in a position where you've figured out who it is you need to talk to, you've engaged with them before you meet them, so you have that common touch point, but then you get into the situation and you don't know how to interact. This is the easiest and most basic rule to break the ice, and that is approach as a fan. If you want to meet another author, then read their books. Have a common reference point that you can talk about and say, I really enjoyed in your books how you did X, Y, or Z. I really liked the way the story played out in this regard or this regard. Start with something that both of you like, and most importantly, is not self-focused, but is other-focused. One of the worst things you can do is enter into a conversation and make the conversation about you. And unfortunately, when we're networking, often that's exactly what we do because we're approaching the person wanting something. And so one of the secrets is to approach not wanting something, but as a fan, as someone who is excited for the opportunity to engage with this creator. Because the reality is we're all creators in this industry. We're all people who want to make cool things. And for most authors, getting that validation of you've made a cool thing is going to help them open up, not be quite so awkward, and be more willing to engage with you. So next time that you have the opportunity to go to DragonCon or to go to any convention really, or just meet other authors, I want you to remember these things. Networking is vitally important because you find people through people. And it's through these relationships that opportunities are created. Having a community already, or at least having common touch points with the people that you want to interact with, is incredibly helpful. And finally, approach as a fan. Try to make your conversations other-centered instead of self-centered, and you're going to find the conversations come much, much easier. So that's it for my basics of networking. And if you keep these three things in mind and you actively practice them, you're going to find that your networking becomes much, much easier as well. Do me a favor though, let me know in the comments who you would love to meet. This could be a famous author, it could be a not famous author, it could be anybody really. But who is someone that you would absolutely love to meet and have a conversation with?